Good evening. Welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Senior Director of Content for the museum. First off, I want to ask, does everybody here have a poker chip that looks something like this? Everybody got one? Excellent. That chip is not just a pretty memento, although it could be. It has real value. By handing in that chip at our speakeasy after the program, you will get $2 off a drink. So it has real value, at least $2. I encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity, not only to receive that discount, but to take a look at our newest exhibit space. Just really beautiful. We're very proud of it, and we really love you to come down and take a look. There's another reason to do that, which I'll talk about in a minute. Organized crime stories come in a variety of flavors. There are the Prohibition-era tales of bootleggers battling each other and the law. There are the stories dissecting the mob's various criminal activities, from extortion and gambling to prostitution, labor racketeering, and more. And there are the stories of law enforcement cracking down on organized crime. Another popular flavor is of a more recent vintage, the dramatic stories of the traditional mob and its decline at the end of the 20th century. We have the privilege tonight of hearing one of the more interesting of those stories. As you will soon hear, our speaker was an unlikely person to get caught up in the Mafia life in New York during the 1980s. And the way in which he became involved was quite unusual as well. I will let him tell that story. But what this ultimately meant was that he was mentored by one of the most notorious and prolific mob assassins in history, Greg Scarpa, nicknamed the Grim Reaper. It also meant that he actively participated in a bloody 2-year war for control of the Colombo crime family that resulted in at least 12 murders, probably more, and dozens of prison sentences. So before we introduce our speaker, I want to mention that we, as always, will have a question and answer session after the talk, and I will moderate that. We will have assistants coming around with microphones because we want to be sure that when we record this event, we can hear your question. And so I will call on people who raise their hand, as usual. Following that, we will have a book signing. Our speaker has a really fine book. This is what it looks like. It's called The Life. And it will be available for sale and to be signed down in the speakeasy area after the talk. So, with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Larry Mazza.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here. I thank you all for coming. My family came from the East Coast to support me. And yeah, it's great. The last time I was in a courtroom wasn't as much fun. So there's a big difference. But I'm at the point I am in my life now, I'm blessed. I went through what I went through, and we're going to talk about that. But I've been humbled by the kindness, like Mr. Schumacher and Miss Ashley Erickson inviting me here and supporting me and coordinating this. I've had the pleasure of meeting several actors, producers, and I'm actually, I'm not supposed to use that word, acting in a few different TV shows, and there's a movie that's coming out called The Irishman with Robert De Niro. It should be out in December or a little bit later. I played the part of the guy that kills Albert Anastasia in the barber seat. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Murder, Inc. Well, Albert Anastasia, I got to whack him one more time. So, what else was I in? I was in a murder mystery that is going to be on Discovery ID. And for those of you who have been in Vegas for many years will probably recognize the name, Ron Rudin. Okay, well, I play an ex-dirty cop that works for the mob. And it was Tony Spilatro, who was Joe Pesci's character in Casino. And the last thing, I mean, I've done some interviews for Discovery and things like that, but one of the doors that opened through a producer named Kevin Kaufman, who's a very good friend now, is to do a mini-series on the downfall of the mob. It might lead into other areas of downfalls, like, rap stars and musicians or actors, like a Belushi thing, where they make it to the top and then the downfall. So the first episode was going to be about John Gotti. Didn't quite go as planned, so we just changed that, and they made that a John Gotti story, and now we're going to go with the downfall, which I'll be producing. The reason I'm talking about that, that's all good stuff, and I'm happy to be here, and again, I'm humbled by it all. And I regret the road I took to get here. And as Mr. Schumacher said, it is quite unique. If you're familiar with Nicholas Pileggi, he read my book, and he said it's a classic. It's unique. It's different. De Niro loved it. Armand Assante, you have a picture of Armand in the corner there. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but he played John Gotti for HBO, and it was a tremendous performance by him and the whole cast. It was a really good movie. So I've been, again, but to get to that point is something I'm not proud of. I was 17, and I come from a totally normal family. One of them, somebody along the way, said it was like Leave It to Beaver. I mean, my father was a lieutenant in the fire department. My mom worked in a bank when we got a little bit older, Union Bank of Switzerland, big international bank. And I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy for a few years, but then my mother stopped it because I couldn't wake up in time, like 7:30 masses and stuff, so she said, you don't need to be an altar boy. I played every sport there is to play, and I was a good athlete. Jimmy Pinto back there, he was one of my teammates back in the day. So, my sister went to Catholic school, my brother. When we got up through to high school, they both went to Catholic school. I decided I wanted to stay local and go to Lincoln. They had a better sports program, and it was nearby. Other reasons, too. I just didn't like traveling as far as I had to go to the Catholic high school. But my father was going to pay for all that. I went to college for 6 months. You ready for this? John Jay College of Criminal Justice. It's not a joke. You can't make this up. I was there for 6 months, or maybe a year. Do you remember? It was about a year. I had 2 semesters, whatever that meant, 6 months each. 6 months each. I remember being in a hole for 6 months. That's solitary for you people that don't know that. Anyway, I threw myself off there. So I wound up in Lincoln, and I had a job, which was in a supermarket, Dan's Supermarket. They had about 11 stores in Brooklyn. And one of my jobs was, go store to store. If one of the stores needed bananas, they'd send me to pick up 5 cases, or if another one needed something else, I would do that. But on weekends, there was a lot of deliveries. So I would load these deliveries up on the van and take them to the houses. I was 17 years old. I wasn't quite in college yet. I was going, in the September following, but on that route of deliveries that I did, I meet this older woman. She was, at the time, we both lied. I was 17. I told her I was over 18. And she was about 32 or 33 and told me she was 29. You could see her down there at the bottom, or also up there with the Grim Reaper, Greg. And that, unfortunately, the one just to the left was what happens when you're in that life. She didn't age very well, unfortunately, and a lot of people don't that are in that life. So we wind up having an affair. At first, I didn't ask any questions. A lot of guys my age wouldn't have asked questions. Then when she started talking about her kids and stuff, I found out she was married. And she told me he's never home, not to worry, we can have, this is okay. And it went on for 10 years. Yes. Well, just about, maybe a little less. But in the process, I find out that her husband is Greg Scarpa. Again, I don't know how many are familiar with him, but he had the nickname the Grim Reaper. And later on, not that early when I first met him, but later on he told me he stopped counting at 50 bodies. So he was probably like Al Capone, maybe worse. So now, obviously, I'm very concerned. I'm worried, but she was convincing. He's never here, which he wasn't. 4 nights or so a week, he wasn't around. I wound up finding out later on that he had another family in New Jersey. So he was living a dual life. Wow. He had a third wife. So all these years later, people are trying to blast me, why did he allow you to be with her? Why did he allow this? He's not around anymore, and I don't think anybody's ever asked him that. But one of the things I really believe I made his life easier. Because she was much younger than him. He was in his 50s at the time. So he was 52, she was 32, and I was 18, 19, 20. So it just was a convenient thing for everybody, for lack of a better word. After about a year and a half, I'm getting closer to him. He's starting to put me in businesses, legitimate businesses at first. And he wants to see me do well. Because, you know, the wife, Linda, had told him several times that this is a really good kid, he's loyal, he helps me out when I can't go shopping, little things like that. She starts telling me that we need to tell him. I said, oh, yeah? I said, you want to get me a bulletproof vest first? I mean, I'm not going to tell you. How are we going to tell him this? So she says, no, he'll be okay with it. He loves me so much. And anyway, again, young, naive, I continue the affair. Eventually, I always knew that it would come to a head at some point. But after about 18 months or so, we used to go to the club together every day, a social club, to open up. I would be with him 12:30. We'd be the first ones to get to the social club. And on the way, he starts talking to me about he's seeing a change in me, that you're not the same Larry I met, because I was getting very nervous. I was getting paranoid. And I was feeling very guilty because we were becoming friends. And he was trying to help me in businesses and things like that. So he starts telling me that he knows that I'm adult enough to have this conversation, and my heart was beating because I knew where he was going. And I always thought of that part in The Godfather where Michael Corleone convinces the other guy to admit he did something. He says, just don't insult my intelligence. I said, someday he's going to do that to me, and I'm not going to admit it. I'm still not going to admit it. So he walks me into the club. We walk in. We sit down at the desk. And he's continuing this conversation. And I'm looking at the closet behind me. Because I had heard stories about, up to this point, I wasn't involved in anything drastically bad. And I remember stories about somebody sitting in that seat, not giving the right answers, and getting carried out in a rug or whatever. So I'm waiting to hear that door open, but it didn't open. He tells me, I know about you and Linda, and I can understand how it happened, and I'm just being quiet. He tells me that as long as it stays just between the three of us, we'll both stay alive. That was one of the rules of the life. You can't sleep or date with somebody's wife or girlfriend. One of the rules. That was already being broken. Okay. So my answer to him was, I don't know where I got the nerve. I says, you know what, Greg? I says, only an idiot wouldn't see what was going on. And I have a lot of respect for you, and I know you're not an idiot. He busted out laughing. We walk outside. He's got his arm around me. And from that, so now the next 8 years or so, this relationship went on. Some of the businesses I was in didn't make it for various reasons, whether his partners wound up dead or They ran away because he was taking all the money. I don't know all the details, but some of the companies that I was working for as a sales manager, as a fire extinguisher sales manager, went away. I was on the list, and very high on the list, to be a fireman, like my father. And unfortunately, I got swayed away from that game plan, thinking I was going to be this big, intrepid, I don't know if that's the word, this big, successful businessman. So now these businesses are gone. 2 years goes by, the test gets thrown out. It went into the courts, and there was problems with the test. So it took another 2 years before I would be able to take the test again. In the interim, I started with these businesses. So now I'm out of those businesses. And his advice to me was, well, you could start taking numbers. It's harmless enough. I don't know if everybody here, I'll explain to you what the number business is. It's very much like the legal lottery today, where you pick 3 numbers, and if the 3 numbers come out, you win $500. Well, the lottery we had was based on the track handle, like Belmont or Santa Anita. So every day the number was random that would come out. Guys would walk around, and I was one of them now, going to certain places where people would just give me the number, 221, 2 and 3, if they wanted it straight and boxed. It was a very lucrative thing back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Then when the state started with their lotteries, we weren't in demand anymore for that. So we moved into bookmaking. I became a bookmaker. And even that, to this day, I'm not ashamed of that. I mean, look at the town I'm in. I mean, it's all around me. Gambling is gambling. And most of the feds I met down the road felt the same way. The prisons that I went through, the prison guards and wardens felt the same way. Is one prison that I went to, they knew that I was booking in prison. And, you get to use stamps as currency. So you're allowed 3 books of stamps. That's all you're allowed at one time, so nobody can, have any more power or have more money than somebody else. After my 10 years was up, I had 2,000 books of stamps. So I was booking every prison they sent me to, and there was one, the funny story, I go into this one, and the captain calls me in and says, Mazza, what do you got on your mind? I says, well, I just want to continue to do my time and go home. He says, you're not going to do any gambling? I said, of course not. He says, do you think we don't know that you're running the booking here? So I'm looking at him. He puts the camera on, and he's got me in the yard. I walked to a bench with a newspaper filled with stamps and gambling tickets. I put him down for one of my runners. He picks up the newspaper and walks into the unit. So that unit got theirs. Then I walked to the next bench. I do the same thing. They had it all on tape. But they told me, as long as nobody gets hurt or threatened, we don't care. You're grown men, you got to do your time. So my point is, the bookmaking was isn't one of the things I'm overly regretful about. But as you start getting involved in these things, it branches out into other things. If somebody doesn't pay, they got to get hurt back in the day. Or they go to the Shylock, who was Greg. And Greg was a Shylock's Shylock. He would give Shylocks money to put out in the street and collect that ridiculous rate each week. So if somebody couldn't pay me, I would send them to Greg. They'd borrow the money so they could pay, but now they'd be paying its interest for who knows how many years. So you start getting into the Shylock business, a little dirtier than sports. Then he asks me one day to give this guy a flat tire. So I say, hey, he's good enough to me. He wants me to give the guy a flat, I'll give him a flat. So I get my ice pick. Well, he gave it to me. I get there at 6 o'clock. I was actually a little late, and in the morning, I give the guy a flat. The next day, the New York Post, man killed fixing flat. That's my first taste of whatever word you want to use, murder, killing. And my point is, you get brought along very slowly. after I knew that, I got to be honest, I thought I really didn't do anything wrong, so it's not the end of the world. A few months later, he says, you got to take me downtown. I got to see Scappy about something. Scappy is up at the top on the left, the furthest picture to the right, and he's got like a cigar in his mouth. That was my first captain, and it was Greg's captain. So I take him downtown. I find out later the guy got killed in that club that night. And he comes out, I drive him back home. Tells me the next day, the guy's name was Bucky, he's taken care of. We had to get rid of him. So now he's confiding in me in these things. A few months goes by, buy a shovel. Okay. Then you dig a hole. Then you sit next to him while he takes somebody out for whatever reason. Then he sits next to you while you're asked to do it. So it's a gradual thing, how you get groomed into this life. And none of that I'm proud of, and I'm not, I definitely, I don't want sympathy. I took responsibility. There came a time when I mentioned prison, where I got arrested after, living the life. And the reason I called it the life is that's what we refer to it as if you're in the mob or Cosa Nostra, whatever words you guys are familiar with. And even our ladies can call it the life. How'd you get in the life? The prosecutors called it the life later on. He was in the life since he's 17. Other people, I'm not sure, if you call it Cosa Nostra, Mafia, the mob, but like I said, to us it was a life. That's how I got that name. So now I'm getting much, much closer to him. I'm privy to or actually involved in hits. The first one was personal, and that's another thing they do. They're not going to typically, like you read, ask you to kill a friend for your first piece of work. It's typically something personal, and his daughter, Greg's daughter, nearly got raped. So when she came home from school and told him the story, or told the mom who called us up at the club, we went to the car service that was supposed to be driving her to school, and we gave this guy a vicious beating. And I justified it in my mind, because if it had been my sister, I wouldn't have needed Greg or anybody. I would have done the same thing if somebody I loved. So in my mind, I said it was okay what we did. But he wasn't happy. We kept calling this car service for the next 2 months. Eventually, the car service driver gets killed. So still, I can justify it. As time goes on, the family starts heading in a different direction. First of all, his son became a captain and decided that one of the rules of drugs, that we're not supposed to be in that business, I never was, he decided that we were going to get into it, or him and his crew. I was directly under the father, so I didn't fall under him. And within a few months, our social club, where guys were playing cards, paying, collecting monies for gambling and numbers, looked more like a scene out of Scarface. Guys were coming in, coked up, dealers were coming in, and what they were doing was forcing them to pay a tax. If you were selling drugs on a street corner somewhere, you had to kick in to the family. You couldn't exist without paying the family something. That was the seed to get involved in the drug business. But greed takes over. Then he decided to find a connection to sell to the drug dealers. Then he wanted his own people. Just keeps going and going. It's like the blob, how it just keeps growing, and guys were getting killed because they wouldn't give up their spot. Now we have all kinds of drug enforcement people watching our club. At that point, I stopped staying there. I opened my own club because I really didn't want to be around that. And I was moving up. A lot of years are going by, and one of the problems was our boss, Junior Persico. I don't think I have a picture up there of him. I don't. Gets a life sentence, or 135 years, virtually life. Him and Scappy and a bunch of others. As a matter of fact, when he got the 135 years, Scappy looked at Junior and he says, well, we only have to do 2/3. And that made the newspaper, that little line. A lot of funny stuff came out of that trial. It was the commission case where they got the 5 heads of the family, the 5 families in New York. And that forced us now to have to, Junior Persico, to find somebody to take his seat at the top. And that man is right there, Vic Arena. Vic was a captain that was trusted by Junior, but he knew he could control him. So he wasn't groomed to be a boss. He wasn't definitely not built to be a boss, but the family, the Persico family, knew they could control him, so they put a weaker guy in there, which backfired. Other families started influencing him, and that led to our downfall. We split up into 2 factions. Greg stood with the Persicos, which meant I stood with the Persicos. I would go wherever he went. Vic wanted the family to himself, so he reached out and tried to get some of the other capos to align with him. It would have to be unanimous or it can't happen. And it's not likely to happen because when somebody becomes a boss, the first thing they do is make their brother the underboss, somebody else that's very close to consigliere. There's 20 captains, 10 of them are cousins, and so they're not going to turn. They're not all going to turn. So it was a stalemate. And in the life, a consigliere, unlike the Godfather, is a coveted position. His main function is to save lives. So if you get called to a meeting at 2 o'clock in the morning by a consigliere, you don't have two thoughts about it. No fear, you go see the man. And he's going to try to save you if you're in trouble, or he's not going to be the one to kill you. And our consigliere at the time was a man named Jimmy Angelina. Everybody loved him. I would go 2 o'clock in the morning in a heartbeat. I'd brush my teeth, get in the car, and I'd go. He approaches Greg. And Greg had just been in the hospital for about 4 or 5 months. He had numerous operations. He had his whole stomach taken out. Was ulcerated from taking aspirins without eating anything or drinking anything. Anyway, and he gets a bad blood transfusion, winds up with the HIV virus, so he went downhill pretty fast. But at this meeting, I go and I have Jimmy come out, and I'm going to walk away because this is a higher level that I should be sitting around. But Greg says, no, Larry, you could stay. Is it all right, Jimmy? Jimmy says yes. He asks Greg, would you back Vic if he decides he wants to take this officially? Now, I'm thinking Greg's mind is off from being sick. He doesn't give him an answer. He says, I semi-retired, I just got out of the hospital. And I know that's not like him. He would declare himself. So we get back in the car, and I ask him, I says, why did you not declare where you are, with Persico or Jimmy? He tells me right there, after sitting in the hospital for 5 months, he wasn't sure who Jimmy was speaking for. If he was speaking for Junior, he's testing him, and if he goes with Vic, Junior will have him killed. If he says yes, Vic will have him killed if he stays with Persico. So he's play in the middle at this point. Within 2 weeks, Jimmy Angelina is gone. He's missing. Consigliere. Untouchable. Nobody kills a consigliere. I mean, in the 20 years I was in the life, I never heard of it. The guy up there to the far left, Carmine Sessa, he was one of Greg's soldiers. And because he was in that crew, Vic figured if he made him the next consigliere, he'd get Greg to side with him. So Carmine comes to Greg and asks him, would you back Vic in a takeover? Same things happened. Greg told him, you're going to wind up like Jimmy. And he loved him because he brought Carmine up. So Carmine has to now act. His act is to kill Vicarina. He misses the opportunity, and the whole war erupts. So for the next 2 years, I'm getting shot at. I'm wearing bulletproof vests. I'm shooting at people. And we became a very dangerous crew. It was kill or be killed. And it was the downfall. It was a downfall. Ultimately, the feds weren't going to sit back and let people, especially when innocent people, started getting hurt from stray bullets or whatnot. And again, I never, thankfully, didn't, because I walked away from a lot of hits I was supposed to do. And you see, hopefully, if you read the book or research the story, Greg was starting to get dementia from the AIDS that he had, and he wasn't making very good choices. So we stopped a bunch of dangerous or hits that were unnecessary, my partner Jimmy and I. And anyway, ultimately, they really cracked down. And I had a friend of mine who I grew up with, who was a very bad kid. At 13, he had tattoos. Nobody in the neighborhood thought he'd ever make it anywhere. He winds up becoming a highly decorated detective. And the altar boy that everybody thought was going to be a fireman winds up, in front of the government for racketeering and murder and gambling and loan sharking. It was, it was crazy. But the thing is, Tommy, my friend, always tried to convince me when I was in the life, get out, walk away from it. My father, anybody that really cared for me. But I always took it, no, I'm not, I'm just a bookmaker, that type of thing. But now, here I am in front of the United States government facing a life sentence. And it comes out that my boss, Greg Scarpa, was working for the feds for 30 years, since the 60s. If anybody is familiar with the movie Mississippi Burning, okay, in the movie, there's a part where the FBI needs to find these bodies of the civil rights workers. One of the FBI agents comes to Greg and asks for help, okay? It was in the New York Times. You could research this too. He brings the guy into the woods and does things that I can't even say. But he gets the bodies for the FBI. True story. Like I said, you could read up on it in the New York Times, and it's been highly publicized on the East Coast since it happened. So here I am. I am now in prison for a year. Still fighting my case, hoping for the best. Maybe I can get a 10 or 15-year sentence, which I wound up getting 10 years. But my boss goes in front of the judge and admits that he was working for the government and he thought he would be able to go home. And I'm in prison now with guys that I hurt their families from the war. I was in the lower bunk, in the higher bunk. Vicarina was in the bunk below me. And a few days earlier, he calls me into the bathroom, That's where we have meetings, the mob guys in jail. We go to the men's room. And not that there's any women there. And they asked me, did you know about Greg? We hear he's a rat. I went after them. I said, there's no way, it's impossible. And I'm ready to fight with my ex-old boss. But then a few days later, this all came out that Greg was working for them for 30 years. They had paperwork. I get called in the bathroom again. This time, I had to put my tail between my legs. And the questions they were asking me, there's very little chance that I would survive my sentence, because they were claiming that I had to know, I had to be part of it. There's no way he could have been doing this for 30 years. So the government now wants to, they have a problem with some of these cases, with this corruption coming out. So I was lucky enough to have a lot of detail about that I really didn't know who it was. I knew he had somebody. He called it his girlfriend when his girlfriend called up. Now I was confused. I know he had 3 wives, and who's the girlfriend? But it winds up, it was alleged to be an agent who went to trial later on. Anyway, my friend Tommy, the ex-cop, it's funny how it's almost like angels with dirty faces, how things come back around. He calls me and says he's spearheading the investigation. And there's a bunch of other cops on the case, and would I help them with that? So a few other things happened. And, this may come out like I'm making an excuse for making a deal with the government. Maybe it is, but to me it was a business decision. I had my family to put before the Colombo family as I started seeing things. The boss's son, who we were fighting for, who I risked my life for, Junior Persico. I'm in prison with the son. We were also in bunks together. And after it comes out about Greg, he tells me that him and his father knew about Greg for 20 years. What is that telling you? I mean, if they knew they had guys killed for cutting them off at the gas pump or because they looked at their girlfriend the wrong way, but they didn't kill him. So all these things, and I called my lawyer and I said, you know what? He's been begging me to talk to these people since day one. I fired one of my lawyers. I said, you could keep writing letters because you write nice letters, but all you want me to do is cooperate. What do I need you for? The other lawyer was dead set against cooperators or making a deal or whatever you want to call them. Whistleblowers, that's a nice one. If you're not in the mob and you tell, you're a whistleblower. So, no. Anyway. So, let's take a little step back. Rule number 3 about ratting. My boss. I was sleeping with his wife, became a drug lord, and now turns out he's a rat. So obviously all those sacred rules are not that sacred. So I call this lawyer up and I tell him, I want to talk to them if they want to. And I know it's about the corruption. I have nothing I can give them after my boss and Carmine. Carmine Sessa was the first one to flip on the case. He's another one that started this whole problem. When they arrested him with 5 other guys, the 5 other guys went in cars in handcuffs. They took him in another car in a different direction. He set the whole thing up. So that was, anyway. So I have him and Greg tell him the whole story. I had nothing new for them. So I really wasn't going to get a deal until the corruption came out. That's what saved my life. We had various things happening during the war which led to the FBI. They have a secret frequency. We had a scanner. So we were following the FBI task force with the New York detectives. We're following them and listening to them because we had that secret frequency. Nobody was supposed to be able to hear the FBI talking to each other, but we were listening. There was times, I could go on, and I don't know how much Mr. Schumacher wants me to keep going, where we came out of the house loaded, shotguns, pistols, bulletproof vests, bulletproof hats, you name it. Pull out, and we hear them. They had a little code. They called themselves Charlie Cougar. and they all had red Cougars. So we pull out, number one just left, Charlie Cougar 2, where are you? We get to the corner, there's a red Cougar with two FBI agents. So we shoot around the block, we go right back to the house, we take everything off, put it away, and we come back out again, and we left the scanner. We leave the scanner with Linda. And back in the 80s, we had a shoe phone, like the old Maxwell smartphone that, you know, before the cell phones. So I had that in the car, and she's on the phone at the house. She's listening to the scanner, calling me in the car. They're still following you. So where did we get that frequency from? Obviously, it was him. We had addresses of our enemies. We had information of where they were going to try to hit us, all from wiretaps. And he was getting all this information. We get an address of where Vicarine is hiding out, okay? Later on, we go, and it's the wrong address. An FBI agent testifies at this trial for this corrupt agent that he got that address where Vicarina was hiding. Okay, this is a lower-level FBI agent. He gives it to his superior. That same exact wrong address wound up in Greg's pocket. So there was a lot of this that I knew, and Kelly, my wife, tells me several times that they still come to me, asking me questions. There's probably something in the recesses of my mind that I know that I really don't know, but I just, you know, if I could put my finger on that. Anyway, that got me a 10-year sentence, so instead of life. And that's why I say I'm blessed today that I'm here. I got a part in The Irishman. I have this Ron Rudin murder show. It's going to be on Discovery ID sometime between June and September. And hopefully my book, I've met Robert De Niro, Nick Pileggi, Armand DeSante, loved it. He wrote a beautiful testimonial. I think some of you have it here. And I'm going to be producing, hopefully, a series with Kevin Kaufman about the downfall. So I hope I didn't overstep my time, or I'll keep going if you want. There's a lot more for me to talk about.
Well, that's
no,
fine.
I know. I'm kidding. I think questions would probably.
Yeah, before we do questions, just a round of applause for Larry, please. Really, really good.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that very much.
You know, this is as we've had speakers at the museum before, of course, who have been in the life and have talked about that. But I feel like we got some insights into basically, you know, how things happen and how things went down in a way that I've never heard before here. Yeah. So I'm really excited.
I like to say I grew up in a tough neighborhood. I was fighting every day. I was poor, but I wasn't. My father, like I said, and my mom gave me everything I could have asked for. You know, if I never met Linda, and I'm not blaming her. You know, again, I was old enough to make my decisions. Sometimes we think with the wrong head, right? They say that. Maybe I did that, but you know, that's, if it wasn't for meeting her, I would have been a fireman today, probably.
Well, I want to take the privilege of asking you the first question,
yes,
which is inevitable. You get out of prison, were you worried about, you know, any retribution, and how did you deal with that?
Well, at the beginning, I lived a very, very quiet life. I moved out of New York. I didn't go into the witness protection program or anything like that. I was actually around guys that were still active in the life, in prison. But there was an understanding of what I went through with Greg. And also, if they want to get even with somebody, there's a long line before me. Seriously. Now, again, I broke a rule. I did break the rule. We're not supposed to talk to the government in any way, shape, or form. But I could live with what I did. It was a corruption that was my saving grace. And I don't live in fear. I don't live in fear of that. Because like I said, I didn't expose anything. I didn't, there's a long line in front of me.
Well, I was going to say, too, that, and I don't know what this says about the Colombo family, but I think you were one of about a dozen guys who ended up turning, right?
Maybe, what do they call those 12 dozen? Like a gross? No, there was a whole bunch. I mean, the prosecutors said there was, what was the term they used? There was a line out we clogged the system. I had to move from prison to prison because there was like literally 150 Colombo soldiers in prison. You know, some cooperating, some not, whatever. But yeah, it was a jam, a log jam.
Very good. Well, raise your hand if you have a question, please. We have one up front.
Yeah, so what did they take you down for? I mean, why did you go to prison? Was it murder or was it
It's
racketeering?
It's a racketeering indictment, but then they have what's called predicate acts. They add the murders that you're involved in. I guess they call it assault and battery or extortion. They have a whole list of things. And, you know, there's 12 of us on the indictment. So they put everything on there, even things that I didn't do. But they just put it on there, and they know some of it's going to stick. Not that I was guilty of probably 75% of it, but they just throw everything on there. So there was murders, attempted murder, conspiracy, which covers everything.
Okay.
So,
and then
yeah.
my other question was, you said you were in a hole, and why?
Well, there's various reasons. Did I just show? Oh, there it goes. There's various reasons. Sometimes it's protective custody. Like when I first made the deal and I really didn't want to go through the program thing, I had to be in alone. The second time, this is a little funnier. I was in for about 8 years, maybe a little less, maybe 6 or 7. And when you're in a certain amount of time, you work your way up to a certain status level for jobs and things like that. And my job was commissary, which was 2 days a week. And I had to mop a little foyer, which was probably no bigger than this area that me and Mr. Schumacher are standing in. I earned that easy job. The new guys coming in are supposed to do the snow detail and the kitchen detail. So after all these years, one of the counselors tells me I got to shovel snow. Now, I've got my own cell finally. I've got good jobs, making $14 a month on one of them, and I think the other one was $12 a month. So you could only spend $33. So that was like upper middle class. That was okay. But he asks me, he says, no, I need you to shovel the snow. I says, Mr. Reed. I remember his name. I said, I didn't have to call him Mr., but I called him that, and he was probably younger than me anyway. I says, I'm down 7 years, whatever it is. I said, I have my job. Why are you asking me to shovel? You know, give it to one of the new guys like I went through. Now it's push comes to shove. I said, I'm not doing it. I said, I have 2 jobs. He calls the associate warden down. He says, Mazza, just shovel for the guy and get it out. I said, I'm not doing it. The warden comes. I don't give in. We have to put you in the hole. No problem. I go in the hole. I wind up staying there 6 months. But wait, I'm not going to. The cops that watch the hole have the easiest job in the system because you come out an hour a day, get a little fresh air. I actually had a shower in the cell, so I didn't even get to come out for a shower. So they come every single day. The captain, the lieutenants, this is process. They knock on my door. Do you want to come out yet? Are you doing okay? I'm fine. Reed's brother is trying to rattle me now. So he'll come at 3 o'clock in the morning. So now I went into survival mode. I slept during the day. He came at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was doing push-ups. The next day, I'm shadow boxing, moving around my cell. So he stopped bothering me. Long story short, I wouldn't give in. I get shipped out to MCC, which is the prison in Manhattan, for some kind of hearing or whatever. Now when I come back, they're all waiting there for me. Maz, you going to go back in the hole again? I says, no. I says, I'm fresh now. I was there for 3 months, whatever the thing was. I know I got to start at the bottom again. So the captain of my unit, the one that had me on film, comes over to me and he says, I'll never forget this. I never heard the term before. He says, you have incredible intestinal fortitude. But I'm going to say this. The cops were very good to me in the hole because they knew I didn't belong there, and they didn't like the counsel that put me there. As far as one day I was in the yard, and they left the gate open, not to get out, but to get back into the hall to go to my cell. So I come walking back in after a couple of hours, which they let me stay longer, and there's no cops around. I was saying, whoa. I walk in my cell. They jump out and say, boo! They were in my shower. They were kidding around with me. I mean, so they made it, they made it as comfortable as possible. I don't want to ever be in the hole again. It wasn't healthy. But I was probably more stubborn than I should have been. So.
Another question? We have in the front, in the middle.
Who's got? Oh.
I just wondered, were the FBI as corrupt back then as they seem to be now?
Well, you know, look at my boss. Greg Scarpa had an agent. Many of you probably heard of the Whitey Bulger story out of Boston. I believe there's another one that came out not too long ago. And I think it's almost like, my opinion, the stockbrokers that wind up in pyramid schemes. They don't start out that way, but they wind up snowballing and they get out of control. I think a lot of times that happens to the agents. I don't know that they came on the force with the devious mind of, oh, I'm going to make extra money. But in their quest for information and power and stepping up the ladder, which is very important to government workers, I learned, I think they go over the line. And in my case, it was blatantly over the line. It was horrendous, giving us information on guys to kill. I mean, you know, pretty bad. But it's not a good thing. I hope it changes. Yeah.
Up in the front row.
My question is similar to his. I was just wondering, how many FBI agents served time over their corruption, and are they listed in the book?
You know, there's one in Boston, and I don't know firsthand, but I know from the Whitey Bulger story, got a hefty sentence, like 20 or 40 years. No, the one on my case, and it's funny, 3 agents testified against him. I testified at that trial, several guys. The reason he got, and it was the state of New York that brought the case. That's why I was able to get some play, because my friend Tommy was a detective on the force. The judge made it crystal clear that although they had to throw the case out, and I'll backtrack and tell you why, was that he does not believe for 1 minute that the guy was innocent. But he had to throw it out because Linda, earlier on, made some statements to a news reporter that this agent was not part of anything. My opinion is she was still on the payroll, where Greg was getting some money from the government. On top of everything else, he was getting money. Taxpayers. Then, at the trial, my opinion is that she no longer was getting subsidized by the government, so she came out with the truth and said he was corrupt, him and Greg were partners, or whatever her exact words were. But now, those two different stories, the prosecutor or the DA, the New York DA, had to throw the case out. But like I said, the judge, and that judge, that New York judge, I put him over anybody I met in the federal government, between judges and prosecutors. He was a sharp, smart, fair man. So.
We have one over here.
Thank you for your story. It's very inspiring.
Thank you.
2 questions. In the media, in movies, you often see a very romantic, brotherhood-like, depiction of the life, as you call it. Is that how you experience it, or is that different? And secondly, the Colombo family nowadays. Do you believe is there still anything left, and is there any influence that you believe is still there?
It'll never go away. This agent had said to Greg once that their ultimate goal is to stop the administration and the little government within the government. They don't care if there's a bookmaker on one corner, a Shylock over there, but it's the cohesiveness of the family and leadership and tributes being paid up. That's what they wanted to stop. I don't think it'll ever be the same again. From what I see and the people that I see in it today are not, it's a different, they wear hoodies and they don't dress the same. They don't look the same in the neighborhoods. So I don't believe that the family is the same. But in my book, I put a little thing. It's a silly analogy, but I said it's like the train that goes around your Christmas tree. It just keeps going and going, you know. And I called it the La Cosa Nostra Express in the book. And yeah, I said it's funny because you get on and off this train at various stops. Everybody wants to get up to the front car and be the conductor, the boss. So there's a lot of shuffling that goes on. And one of the stops is the cemetery, one of the stops is prison, one of the stops is the witness protection unit. But it's never gonna stop completely. They're still trying to keep it together. But most of the guys that had any brains, and you'll see I mentioned some of them in the book, retired and left. And they left it to a much lower caliber. So there was another part I don't think I quite answered for you.
It was about the romantic version.
Oh, the romantic. When you're young and naive, before you really get in, it's a little bit like the movies because you get that special treatment. You're making money, but as you start climbing up, once you get into the maid level or administration level, and during the war, I got up pretty high. I was with the top tier at every single meeting. I was with Greg on every hit. So then you see the treachery and the backstabbing. And there's no boundaries for that.
I'm always curious about the interactions among the families.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have much interaction with some of the other crime families?
Yeah. That's also different levels, where you're talking about like unions and things like that. The bosses at the top ran all of that, but down at my level, especially early on, there was bookmakers from all the families that dealt and did business together. We lend money back and forth. So there is a lot of intermingling, definitely. And that's where, like, when we had the split and Vic Arena took over, we became a very weak family. And John Gotti, for one, was very much in favor of Vic winning the war because he had his own egotistical dreams of running the whole city, being the boss of bosses. And if he would have got a few more weak bosses in there, it could have happened. But there's another rule that was broken. You're not supposed to kill a boss. So
we can take one or two more if anybody has a question. No, we just use the microphone for these questions. We have one back here, Ashley. Right back.
Hi, I have two questions too.
Yes.
Number one, your immediate family, when did they know that you were actually in part of the life, and how was their support when they knew it and when you got out of the prison? And then two, how has your adjustment and happiness been, not being in New York and also not being a part of that life?
Well, I'm just going to start with that part. I'm in New York a lot.
Okay,
I still love it. In smaller doses, because I'm in Florida now, so it's hard to leave that nice weather. Adjusting, I had an incredibly supportive family, helped me with everything I needed. So I didn't come out to, boy, oh boy, what do I do now? I had a little job lined up, and it wasn't buying a shovel or anything like that. It was nice. It was just in a gym, which now I own a gym. So that part, I had the support. They found out the gory details when I was in the courtroom. Greg was once described by an attorney that got in the drug business and cooperated. And he described Greg as articulate, charming, good-looking, could eat dinner with judges and lawyers. and then for dessert, he'll kill you. Part there is articulate, charming. He was very good about that. My mom and dad met him. The only one that hated him was my grandmother. She called him the devil. Get away from him. But so they knew I was dabbling, and like I said, they thought I was probably just a bookmaker or a number runner. But when I was in that courtroom, I was cringing at the things they were saying with my family there, you know. So that's when they found out. But they never gave up the love and support. Because I look at my life as 3/3. I started out telling you about the blessings and the things that I have going for me now, and the happiness that I have. The middle part is what I regret, and if I could go back in time and erase it, or turn the other way, or take a job at the butcher shop instead of the supermarket, I might have never met her. I wouldn't be in the life. And the first third of my life, like I said, it was no different than anybody in this room. I think.
Well,
I hope.
we can't guarantee that. Well, let's end it there for this portion of our event, and we're going to go downstairs for a book signing, and Larry's going to hang around if you have any specific questions for him down in the speakeasy.
And if anybody doesn't use those chips, I can use a few. I want to have a drink.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much.